Long, long ago, in the days that King Arthur ruled Camelot, there came one evening to the castle a strange knight. His armor was all green from head to toe, and as he climbed off his horse and walked into the castle, the guards tried to block his way, and with just a flick of his hand they went flying. He pushed open the great doors to the dining hall where the king and the knights were feasting, and all the lanterns blew out. The knights immediately drew their swords, preparing to defend their king. And the man said, "I am the Green Knight. I come here to challenge each and every one of you in Camelot. We shall have a contest." "What sort of contest?" said Lancelot. "We shall have a contest of chopping off heads. And I'll give you the first chop. Who would like to try to take my head from my shoulders?" Well, the knights thought, this is a fool. Whether he wears armor or not, one swing from a knight's axe would end someone's life. And if this fool wants to try, well, it's his choice, many of them thought. Gwain was the first one to step forward. "My king, may I try?" he said, asking Arthur. And Arthur slowly nodded his head, not quite sure what was happening here. The Green Knight knelt down, took off his helmet. Gwain grabbed a battle axe. "Are you sure?" said Gwain, and the Green Knight smiled. "Of course I'm sure." And as the axe swung down, his head popped right off. Gwain had killed men in battle before. He figured the body would fall to the ground and that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. The body didn't move. The Green Knight stood up without his head, walked over, picked up his head, and put it under his arm, and just laughed in a great booming voice. "Ha ha 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 ha! Well, you didn't know something about me, I guess. Chopping off my head doesn't hurt at all. But now you, Gwain, must do your side of the challenge. You must come to my castle in 1 year's time and give me a chance to chop off your head." But perhaps you're thinking, I cheated here, having a magic power and such. So I'll give you one way out of this problem. I will tell you a riddle, and if you can answer it correctly for me in 1 year's time, it'll save your head. Gwain looked at the Green Knight and said, "What's your riddle?" The Green Knight, his head still under his arm, said, "I want you to tell me, what is it that women desire most in the world?" Then he turned and walked out of the hall, climbed onto his horse, holding his head under his arm, and rode off into the dark night. While the bravest and the wisest of the knights gathered that evening to talk with Gwain. Try as they could, they came up with lots of answers, but they weren't sure any of them were really right. "Perhaps you should go ask women which of these answers is best," thought Lancelot. And so Gwain set off early the next morning, going from village to village, castle to castle, asking all the women he could see, those that were high-born royalty, or commoners, or peasants, what was it they desired most. Now, some women told him it was riches like gold or silver. Others said fine clothes. Some said a good husband. But it seemed like there was nothing that everyone would agree to. the list of suggestions the knights had made, most of the women laughed at those. Just goes to show how much knights know about women, I guess. Days went by, weeks went by, months went by, and as December rolled around once again and it was coming close to the end of that year, Gwain turned his horse to the north, the direction that the Green Knight had gone. He figured someone there must know him and must know the way to his castle. And he rode with a heavy heart, sure that none of his answers were the right one. And as he was riding along, he saw an old woman at the side of the road. Well, he guessed it was an old woman. This person was bent over, almost so that her back was straight out and her face was looking right at the ground. He could see that she had warts all over her hands and face, and even a bit of a beard, and snot dripping from her nose. In polite company, he'd call her a loathsome woman, and could barely even look at her. But he needed help to know which way to go, so he said, good woman, could you please tell me the way to the Green Knight's castle? I have an appointment there. The woman looked up and smiled. He could see she had one yellow and black tooth in her mouth. Really? Going to see the Green Knight, are you? And not many go there that ever come back. He didn't happen to give you a riddle, did he? Well, as a matter of fact, he did, said Gwain. Really? What riddle was it? Perhaps, if you don't have the answer yet, of course, I can leave you alone if you know the answer, but if you don't have the answer yet, perhaps I can be of some assistance. She smiled again with that one tooth. Gwain thought, well, what would it hurt to ask one more woman? And so he asked her, what is it that all women want? And the woman smiled. Ah, that's an easy one. Every woman knows this, whether they admit it or not. I'll give you the answer on one condition. If it's right, and you save your head, you must come back. And the next time you see me, you must marry me. Gwain thought about that for a moment, and he felt a cold prickle go down his neck. Being married to this woman was not exactly what he had in mind for his future. But he thought, without the answer, there may be no future. So he said, agreed. I give you my promise as a knight. Good, good, said the old woman. You see, the thing that all women want? They want control over themselves and their lives. That's what all women want. And very few women ever get. Gwain took that answer and rode up to the Green Knight's castle, and sure enough, the Green Knight was waiting with his great axe, and said, what's the answer to my riddle? And Gwain had it. The Green Knight narrowed his eyes and looked at him. Did you meet an old woman on the road? He said. Yes, I did. Laughed the Green Knight. Well, you might think you've escaped my axe, but you haven't escaped completely. Enjoy your life, Gwain. And he turned and walked away. Gwain returned to Camelot to cheers and a great feast. Gwain chose not to tell the king or any of the other knights about the promise he had made to the old woman. But before the feast ended, there was a knock at the door. And suddenly the woman came walking into the hall. "King Arthur," she said, "I met your knight Gwain on the road, and I did him a service, and now I come to collect." Gwain looked at the floor. Arthur turned to Gwain and said, "Gwain, is this true? Did you promise this woman something?" And Gwain said, "Yes, my lord. And as a knight, I must keep my promises." So he stood up and said, "My good woman, would you do me the kindness of marrying me and being my wife?" And the woman smiled with her one yellow and black tooth and said, "Of course. Tomorrow we'll get married." The knights, many of whom couldn't even look at the loathsome woman, weren't quite sure what to make of this. Gwain was such a young and handsome knight, yet he'd be marrying this person. But of course they were glad that it was not them. And the next day, Gwain married the loathsome woman. And that night, as the two of them were alone in their bedchambers, he could hear the woman changing into her nightgown. He was a little nervous about this, being the first night of their marriage. But when he turned around, he didn't see a loathsome woman at all. She was tall. She had brown ringlets that cascaded past her shoulders. She had sparkling eyes and smooth white skin. Gwain looked around. "What happened to my wife? What have you done with her?" And the woman smiled. "I am your wife, Gwain. But I'm under an enchantment. You see, I must either be ugly in public and beautiful in my bedchamber, or beautiful in public and ugly in my bedchamber. I can choose which it is, but must be one or the other." Gwain thought about that for a minute. "So my husband, on our first night, which would you have me be? Shall I be beautiful in the bedchamber or beautiful in public?" And Gwain thought about that for a minute. And he thought about the answer to the riddle that the woman had given him. For now that they were wedded, he knew her real name, the Lady Ragnell. And he said, "My lady, I choose to give you sovereignty over yourself. You may choose and decide whatever you would like. For as a very wise woman once told me, all women seek sovereignty, to be in charge of themselves and their lives. So you decide." And suddenly there was a flash. The woman came up and gave Gwain a great kiss and said, "My love, you see, you've broken the spell. Now I don't have to choose, although I could appear anyway with my magic. Now, because you've given me sovereignty, I don't have to deal with the spell." And people say Gwain and the Lady Ragnell, well, they had a long and a happy life. May we all be so lucky. And that's the end of the tale.